Hi darlings, welcome to my channel Me and Places. I'm Paulina and today I want to talk about harassment. This video is based on my own experience and my own reflections, and it is shared only for educational and awareness purposes. To shed the light on how harassment, power dynamics and boundary violations can unfold in everyday situations. I have taken care not to name businesses or individuals, and I am not making legal claims. Instead, I am offering my story as a way to foster conversation, reflection, and possibly change. This is not about blame, but this is about safety and dignity and more responsible and compassionate systems, especially in workplaces where harm can be easily overlooked or dismissed. So now that that's clear, let's start. So during my recent trip to Croatia, I encountered sexual harassment, and that led me to reflect on the nature of harassment, on the nature of reasonable response to harassment claims. And as usual, I am here to share all of this with you. I noticed that the word harassment makes people uncomfortable, or many people uncomfortable. And I personally think that this comes from two reasons. Either you experienced harassment and you know how disturbing it feels, or you never did, and it sounds like a faraway word, like something that always happens to somebody else. But this distance is exactly the problem, because if we cannot name harassment, we cannot also stop it. And even worse, we might end up doing it without noticing. So what is harassment? The World Health Organization describes it as any unwelcome sexual advance, request for sexual favor, or other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature that creates a hostile or offensive environment. This is great, and this is accurate, but also a bit of a snooze. So let's break it down to make it more simple and understandable. Harassment may look like a harmless comment on somebody's body or appearance. It can look like a touch on the lower back or an uninvited kiss. It can even be a message with a wink you never really asked for. And the thing is, it's not about the act itself, but about the context. And I think this is exactly what makes it hard to understand harassment. Because this means that the same gesture can feel welcomed and enjoyed in one moment or in one setting, and very harmful and offensive in another. So what matters is basically if it's wanted, if it is consensual, and if it is respectful. Let's break down harassment to three key elements to understand it better. First one is the lack of consent. So this means that the behavior is unwanted and uninvited. Maybe somebody didn't want to be commented on, or touched, or flirted with. And consent is not just about saying no. It's about whether the person feels safe enough to say no. And silence is not consent. Pressuring another to say yes is not consent either. And just because you were comfortable doesn't mean the other person was. Impact beats intent. So impact is more important than intent. Maybe you were thinking you were being nice, but the other person left feeling creeped out. And guess which one matters more when we examine harassment? It's not what you intended, it's how it landed. A hug might feel friendly to one person, but it might also make another person feel very uncomfortable. And that is what matters. It matters more than the hugger's good intentions. So harassment is judged by what the person experienced, not by what the other person meant. And third thing, violation of boundaries. So boundaries can be physical, which means your physical space. They can be emotional, so like things you are not comfortable discussing. They can be social, acting in a public space. And they can be professional, so how you are treated at work. A boundary violation can look like somebody standing too close, or asking you too personal questions, or making personal comments that make you feel uncomfortable, even though they say it's just being friendly. And again, the key is not their intent, but how it feels for you. And if it feels invasive, it probably is. And you have right to name that. Now, is harassment a rare accident? Unfortunately, absolutely not. Harassment is far more common than many people would like to believe. According to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, 81% of women and 43% of men in the US have experienced sexual harassment or assault in their lifetime. Across the European Union, European Gender-Based Violence Survey reports that 55% of women have faced sexual harassment since age 15. That doesn't sound like a minor issue. That sounds like a huge societal failure to me. And this kind of behavior does not just happen in some shady corners. It happens anywhere. Public spaces, in cafes, outside. It happens on parties. It happens at workplaces. And this happens to people of every gender, in every age group, and all around the world. And given these stats, you would think that we're better dealing with it now. But the spoiler alert is that we're not. So this is my personal story based on my own reflections, on my own memory, on my own experiences, and I am sharing it to shed a light on how these things happen and unfold in everyday life. So the most recent harassment I experienced was during my trip to Croatia. It happened in a small town near the national park that is known for its magnificent waterfalls and beautiful, beautiful nature. And the trip was going great. Well, actually, it wasn't. It was a failure from beginning. My bus was late, and then I missed my bus back because I was waiting on a wrong stop, even though I was waiting on a stop that was marked on my ticket, but it was still a wrong one. And with my phone battery low and trying to figure out the next ticket, the next bus was like in 3 hours or something, I just had to find a place that had sockets so I can charge my phone and deal with this ticket situation. So I found a restaurant for that with sockets, and the area inside was quiet. The waiter greeted me, very friendly waiter, maybe a bit too familiar from the start, but I brushed it off because I was concentrated on charging my phone and contacting Flixbus and all the logistics. Then came the series of weird comments. First, when I said I would like a dessert, probably some ice cream, he said, "We don't have ice cream, but there is ice cream over there, so we can go together to get it somewhere outside in some other place." And that just felt weird, like why a waiter would say that to you. I declined and it felt off. Later he asked, why am I on my phone so much? And I was stressed about this bus situation, which I explained. And his reaction was that just in case, he has a place to stay, so I can stay with him if something happens. This also felt weird. I said I have a flight next day, I need to return, I am not staying anywhere. I was just a guest trying to sort out my travel shit, and he was a waiter crossing boundaries. I recall at one point he asked if I had an Instagram account, but honestly that part did not raise red flags in me. I had my cameras all over, and it's kind of usual on travel when you have vlogs and blogs. People ask you about your social media. They usually want you to tag them somewhere. Also, my Instagram is my travel channel Instagram, so I shared it without worries. So eventually I have eaten, I charged my phone, I got myself a new ticket, I went to a restroom area, and then I went to a counter to pay. And after that, the waiter kind of showed me to follow him. He gestured towards the bathroom area and was like already walking there. And since I just came out of there, I thought, okay, I probably left something. This was my first reaction. But that area is the only area that is out of sight for the kitchen staff and everybody else. And when we were at the door, he suddenly turns around, hugs me without asking or any kind of consent, touches my back and puts his face near to mine, to my neck, says that I'm pretty and he wants to kiss me and that kind of stuff. And I froze for a few seconds because I was like, what the fuck is happening? And it took me a few seconds to figure out what the fuck is happening. Then I came back to my senses, I pulled away, I said, this makes me super uncomfortable. I gathered my belongings, I was super in a hurry, I just wanted to get out as soon as possible. And before leaving, I turned back and said, hey, don't ever do this to your clients ever again. But on that note, he just kind of smiled and shrugged, and that left me even more uncomfortable. It kind of left me feeling discouraged and powerless. And only after I walked away a specific amount of steps, I started to actually comprehend what happened to me, that my boundaries were just violated. And just like that, a space that felt safe became threatening. So after this incident, I did what I thought was the fairest thing to do. I contacted the owner, because how can you be responsible for something you don't know is happening in your restaurant? When I first reached out, I didn't hear back. When I followed up, the owner told me that she will answer soon because she wants to first see the waiter and look him in the eyes. But when her response finally arrived, I felt less heard and more dismissed. To me, it sounded dismissive, defensive, and firmly unwilling to take responsibility. So yes, I did also write the factual reviews, but I also started to examine what kind of steps I can do next. And that's when, sadly, I learned that pointing out harassment is sometimes more precarious than committing it. If I wanted actual accountability, naming the place, naming the waiter, I would be opening myself to legal threats. Not him, me, the person who got harassed. That's the kind of backwards logic that survivors are up against. And for example, if my friends would like to support me and leave distressful reviews about what happened, they risk being flagged as spam, and all the messages, my included, could disappear just like that, like it never existed. I'm telling this not to discourage anybody, but to mention how many obstacles there actually are for people who want to report such things. And I'm very fed up with people blaming the survivors for not doing more. Blame the system for not doing more. Because this is not just my experience, studies also show that this is very common.
75% of people who report harassment are treated unfairly afterwards.
At the same time, only about 6% of actual reports are false. So for many people, speaking up becomes scarier than staying silent. And this chilling effect is very documented. When survivors face claims, legal or social, that discourages them from speaking up. When their words are spun as defamation or he said, she said, they feel dismissed. It's brutal, but the system very often shields the accuser. But here we are talking these things out, which is huge and very useful. So if you had any experiences you want to share and you feel safe enough sharing them, please share them in the comments or share this video with somebody who might need to hear this. Now let's go through some dynamics that were very prominent in my situation, but turns out they are very prominent in almost all harassment cases. So when people hear harassment, they often imagine something unmistakable, something loud, something violent, something you would immediately call the police for. But in real life, very often harassment is less of a horror movie and more like a slow burn psychological thriller. And it usually hides in small little things that are easy to dismiss. A hand that lingers, a joke that feels off, a shift in tone once you are alone. And it's not usually the stuff of the big headlines, it's usually the stuff of the gut feelings. And that is exactly why I want to take a closer look into three main ingredients that often show up in harassment stories, mine included: the power dynamics, the secluded environment, and the lack of consent. Because these are actually recurring motifs in studies, in policy books that nobody remembers to sign, and in survivor testimonies. First and foremost is the power dynamic. Imagine a random guy on a street coming up to you and saying, "Hey, follow me to the restrooms." You would definitely go like, "Fuck off, I'm speed walking the other direction." But when a waiter does this, in the dining setting, it doesn't feel as bizarre. It feels like part of dining experience. Like, aha, this is the part where we retrieve my handbag from the restroom. And this is exactly what I thought. I must have left something and he's doing me a favor. And this happens because there is this invisible script we all follow in public spaces, especially in service environment. And this script whispers to you, "Relax, it's normal. He works here, it's probably nothing." And this whisper is called a power dynamic. And it has a sneaky way of dulling your alarm bells in the situation where a person with a perceived authority is blurring the boundaries. And apparently this is exactly how power dynamic work, because sexual harassment actually thrives in places where power dynamic are not equal. Whether it's because the job title or the setting or the unwritten social scripts we play by, but people who are in perceived authority are more likely to cross the boundaries. So there was a research published in a journal of personality and social psychology that studied this peculiar thing that people who are in position of power, they are not just more likely to cross boundaries, they are also more likely to gaslight themselves into thinking that this was not a big deal in the first place. Second thing, the secluded environment. Isolation is not usually a dramatic plot twist. It's a very usual tactic in harassers' handbook. Cutting somebody off from witnesses and support is not usually an accident. It's usually logistics. And a dimly lit corner is not usually for ambience. It's a tactic move. And even if nothing physically violent really happens, this isolation works as it's intended to work. It makes you feel vulnerable and unprotected. There was this report from 2020 that tells us that isolation is a very common tactic used to avoid witnesses and to increase control. In my personal case, it's kind of hard not to interpret this seclusion as intentional. Waiter didn't simply end up in this secluded place, he gestured me to follow him there. And this alone raises red flags. To me, it suggests that he may have known that his behavior is not okay, and that he is purposefully going to a place where it will not be witnessed. After all, escorting your guests to secluded dim corners is not probably on the job description, unless they are running some kind of haunted house when everything else shuts down. In that case, sign me up, I love haunted houses. But this was not the experience I liked. And what was especially frustrating is how the owner responded when I brought this detail up. She pointed out that this secluded area was not that far from the main dining space. I guess next time I will bring a measuring tape and alert her when I will officially cross the danger zone. But seriously, why this behavior was not questioned? Why it was brushed off so easily? And the third thing, consent. Let's talk about consent for a moment. Not the handbook version, but the real one. The inconvenient one, the slippery one, the one that makes smart people forget how to think clearly sometimes. Because apparently smiling, answering politely and sharing your Instagram now means please escort me to a dim corner and harass me without consent. In reality, consent is not a vibe you get. It's not something you're supposed to read between the lines. It's communication. It's clear and it is ongoing. Half of women worldwide still experience some kind of sexual harassment, and most usually from a person who didn't mean anything by it. Let's remind ourselves. Consent is an agreement that's freely given, enthusiastic, specific, and reversible. It's also not assumed or fished out of politeness. And it is not hidden in friendly joke, in a smile, or in a friendly comment. It is not that complicated. If you're not sure, just ask. And if you're scared to ask because you think the answer might be no, well, here is your answer. So yes, I was polite, I smiled, I laughed, and I believe that I did that because I was raised to be a polite human being, not because I was secretly trained to be manhandled somewhere in a dark corner. Otherwise, I need a serious talk with my parents. So when somebody reports harassment, let's briefly go through how not to respond to a harassment claim. When someone reports harassment, especially in a service setting where they are the client, not the employee, your response can either start repairing the trust or deepen the wound. And the timing also matters. The longer it takes for you to reply, the more it feels like you're just wishing it goes away on its own. So here is what to do right and what to definitely avoid. First, acknowledge the complaint. Are you sure it wasn't a misunderstanding? That doesn't really sound like him. He's just friendly, he didn't mean anything by it. These are poor responses because doubting a person from the start signals to them that you are more interested in protecting your image than to actually ensuring anybody's safety. It also assumes that the neutral baseline of this story is the harasser's perspective. And this is subtle, but a common power play. The good response will be, "Thank you for telling us, we are listening," or "This is serious. I appreciate you bringing this up to our attention." Second, show empathy. "Sorry you felt that way. You seem very sensitive about this. It was just a compliment." These are poor responses, because saying, "I'm sorry you felt that way," kind of shifts the blame onto the victim's perception instead of acknowledging that the act itself was inappropriate. Also, a trauma-informed approach centers impact, not the intention. A good response would be, "I'm really sorry this disturbing thing happened to you. It must have been very upsetting." Or, "This sounds very uncomfortable. I can imagine it was hard to bring it up." Number 3, take it seriously. We will keep an eye on him. All other clients like him very much. We have never had complaints before. These are poor responses. Dismissing a report because it's the first time you hear it only reinforces the silence. The absence of complaints doesn't sadly mean the absence of harm. It often just means people didn't feel safe enough to talk about it. The good responses would be, "This kind of behavior is not tolerated here," or "We're going to look into this right away and take the necessary steps," or "We will treat this confidentially and follow up soon." Number 4, own up and take action. "He's been with us for years. This is really unlike him. He probably thought you were flirting. We will tell him to be more careful next time." These are all poor responses because apologizing without doing anything is just PR. Accountability means you are ready to act, not just issue the statement and hope for the best. Good responses would be, "We are sorry this happened on our premises. It is unacceptable." Or, "We are temporarily removing our staff member until this is fully investigated." Or, "We are reviewing our training and changing our policies to make sure this never happens again." Here are some quick fixes. Avoid "sorry you misunderstood." Say instead, "Sorry this disturbing thing happened to you." Avoid "he didn't mean it." Say instead, "Intent doesn't change the impact." Avoid "you should have spoken up sooner." Say instead, "We know it takes courage to share this. Thank you." And let's go for a bonus round. What not to ask. What were you wearing? Because this is irrelevant. Why didn't you leave sooner? Because you can't know how cornered somebody felt. Are you sure it was that bad? Because let's not gaslight the survivor. And do you think he's just lonely? Because this is a workplace, not a date show. One very important notice I have to bring up is a false claim dilemma. Most major studies on sexual harassment found out that the false claims are actually quite rare. They go somewhere around 6%. So statistically speaking, to encourage people to take every complaint seriously is not same as assuming the guilt, but it is an important step to make a safety environment for the victim to be heard, to the situation to be assessed fairly, and to prioritize safety. False accusations are real, but they are just not this huge epidemic many people want you to believe. The bigger problem is how many real harassment cases are dismissed or brushed off with a complimentary drink. Now I want to go through the real responses I got from the real owner in my real harassment situation. To honor her privacy, I will not be reading the whole messages, but I will comment on specific things she said in her responses. Let me take you through some of the more unsettling of them. One of the things she mentioned was that there were no complaints in 11 years. How did I hear it? This must be an isolated case, maybe even an overreaction, because nobody spoke up before. But silence does not always mean safety. Sometimes it means fear, and sometimes it means shame, or the sinking feeling that speaking up will lead you to more discomfort. The lack of prior reports doesn't erase what really happened to me. I'm not here to stain a clean record. I'm here to simply question if it was ever examined. Another thing I was told in her response is that many clients have said that he is a very good person. And I don't doubt that many people might have found him nice, but that doesn't cancel him being harmful for other people. That walks on the line of a dangerous myth that if somebody is liked and trusted, they cannot do anything wrong. Harm doesn't need a villain costume. It would be easy if it had, but it doesn't. Usually it wears a smile and offers an excellent customer service. And also, this all sounds like reducing harm to a popularity contest. It's like it's real only if enough people voted for that. But that's not how accountability works, or at least it shouldn't be. Another thing I got was, he didn't mean anything by it. And sadly, this is a very common way of handling such reports. So let's look at it closer. That line leans heavily on intent. It's like if you meant well, it somehow cancels the outcome. But in situations like this, it's the impact that counts. If somebody accidentally knocks you over with a shopping cart, you are still on the floor. And whether it was deliberate or accidental does not cancel the bruises. Unwanted physical contact does not become appropriate simply because somebody didn't mean anything. And in this case, it's not like the details were somehow ambiguous. He guided me into a secluded area. This is not a thing that happens by chance. And also, if the explanation is truly he didn't mean anything, then I'm genuinely curious, what did he mean? Next thing, I was assured that this will not happen again because the waiter knows how to separate work and personal life. To my ear, this framing makes it sound like the bad thing here was the bad scheduling, not the fact that somebody crossed serious boundaries while on the job. Saying he knows how to separate work from private life kind of indicates that the problem was not the harassment itself, but where and when it happened. So would it be okay if it happened in a free time elsewhere? For me, the issue is not that his boundaries were blurry, is that mine didn't matter. The focus should not be on how people treat their off hours. It should be on how they treat people during their own hours. It's like scolding the smoke alarm for being too loud instead of asking why is there smoke in the first place. Another thing I was told is that he may have believed we had mutual attraction. Now, even if that was true, which again is only based on me smiling as a normal human being, mutual attraction is not a free pass. Not one person projecting a romance novel onto somebody who's just trying to finish their dinner. And framing the situation this way does not explain the behavior. It excuses it. It shifts the focus away from what he actually did to what he felt, as if his internal hopes held more value than other person's boundaries. What he might have believed does not matter more than the actions he chose to take. And that's where accountability begins. So let's say it louder. Smiling is not flirting. Being warm is not consent. And sharing your Instagram does not mean invitation to a touch me party. Let's advocate for a world where you can be friendly, kind and human without being punished for it. Another thing that was suggested is that there was possibly a misunderstanding due to language differences and culture differences. And sure, culture misunderstandings happen a lot. During my practice in Spain, I noticed that when you meet new people, they often go to this two-cheek kiss, and I would automatically go for a handshake, so I would usually end up jabbing people in their ribs like some kind of confused fencer. And we all laughed and adjusted and moved on. That was awkward, that was mutual, and that was harmless. But this felt different. This felt like a serious boundary being crossed, not a cultural ritual lost in translation. I really do not think that respecting somebody's body should require a multicultural seminar. It should not be some kind of exclusive, complex European etiquette rule. It should be just human decency. And using culture as an explanation sounds like just a way to dodge responsibility. Unless there is some kind of tradition in Croatia that I missed, where waiters leads guests to secluded corners for some kind of hands-on hospitality. But I really do not recall that being part of the brochure. Another thing I was told, which I kind of mentioned already, is that the secluded area that I mentioned is just few meters from the place where I was eating. It is not hidden, it's simply another section, which completely misses the point. It frames the situation as some kind of floor plan logistic problem, not what actually happened. Safety is not measured by GPS coordinates. It's about how somebody makes you feel, especially when they lead you to places that are far away from others, where you cannot live easily. My problem was not the map. I'm actually pretty good with maps. My problem was the motive. Measuring the seriousness of unwanted physical contact by how many meters it was from other people or dining area is like deciding if theft counts depending on how far from the cashier it was. I think when we start asking how hidden the harassment was instead of addressing why it even happened, we are dodging the actual harm. Now listen to this. Another thing I was told in those responses is that waiter had simply wanted to help me in a bad situation, even offering a place to stay, which makes this a collegial gesture. Such a nice man. Now that part with the whole collegial thing made me pause. Seriously, I even had to check if I know what collegial means. Spoiler alert, I did know what collegial means, and it's not this thing implied in this response. It wasn't a peer lending a couch in a trusted travel community like couchsurfing. It was not somebody I knew or asked for help. It was a waiter in a service setting, in a power play dynamic. It was a person who proceeded to cross my boundaries later on, offering unsolicited personal support in a context thick with imbalance, and power play matters, especially when someone is in a service role and another one is a guest. To me, help offered in these circumstances did not feel like kindness. It felt wildly inappropriate. And when help is extended in a way that it benefits the helper more than the one who needs the help, we have to ask, was it really help or was it another boundary being pushed? And framing this as collegial, it gives it this professional shine it simply does not deserve. In this context, this request was inappropriate, and calling it anything else doesn't make it less so. I expect that a workplace that genuinely values care and safety would recognize that and address it, not fucking romanticize it. Another thing I got from the response is that the waiter stopped when I said no. Well, a standing ovation then. Maybe a certificate of a basic human conduct? Let me make it clear, stopping when somebody feels uncomfortable is a bare minimum. It's a floor of human decency. If you knock somebody's drink and then you wipe it up, you don't get applause for bringing a napkin. This response makes it seem like the whole situation is somehow redeemable just because it didn't get worse. My question is not, did he stop or not? My question is, why did he start in the first place? And the owner's resolution to all this was, I should stand by again if I ever pass by. According to her response, I should visit and give them a chance to change my opinion. Clearly, the best way to fix boundary violation is to ask a victim to walk right back into lion's den, because maybe this time lion will be in a better mood. But safety is not a gamble. And trauma is not really cured by repeated exposure. That's more about the phobias. Telling somebody to just come back after they have been harassed ignores what they are carrying: the fear, the discomfort, and the violation. It intentionally puts the pressure back on the person who has been violated, as if the real issue is their opinion about what happened, not the act itself. But this was nothing like a disappointing cappuccino I can send back and ask for another one. To me, it felt like a boundary violation, and it demands accountability, not a return visit. Another thing I got on my claims is that the owner is not a psychologist and not a police officer, therefore cannot do anything. But surprise, being an employer, especially in hospitality, does come with specific responsibilities. And of course, the responsibility is not to investigate crimes, but it is to take concerns seriously and to create safe environment and to uphold professional standards. Dismissing everything with "there are two sides of the story" might really sound neutral, but in reality it usually silences the harmed part. And then came the legal threat that he will go to police and prove his innocence, and that this thing I'm doing might be about lies and defamation. The message was clear: you have gone too far now. And this is a pattern many victims will recognize, where reporting harm ends up being seen as a problem, where instead of compassion you are met with legal language, and where in the end the priority is not to resolve harm or ensure safety, but to restore silence. And her final words: the punishment between him and you is gonna be determined by the court, kind of places me and the waiter on the same scale, as if our actions were equally questionable. That too is a form of erasure of what happened, of who held power, and of who made whom feel unsafe. And let me be clear, I never asked for a trial, and I never asked her to be a police or a psychologist. I asked for recognition, for accountability, and for a response that reflected care. And what I got instead was a door closed on me, politely at first, and in the end just slammed shut. So for me, that response felt less like damage control and more like damage done. The main things I picked up from it were victim blaming, because emphasizing my personality and my behavior, the blame shifts on me, not on the action. Minimizing the incident, because excusing it as a cultural misunderstanding or a professional mix-up avoids recognizing the seriousness of what actually happened. Avoiding accountability, phrases like "I'm not qualified to do that" sound like deflection of responsibility to me. And fourth, no concrete actions. There were no mentions whatsoever about staff training or changes in policy or any kind of measures to prevent these kind of things happening in the future. To sum it up, every sentence in her response seemed designed to soften, sidestep, or reframe what happened, to protect the institution and not the person who got harmed. Rather than holding anybody accountable, I was encouraged to reinterpret my own experience, to doubt myself, or to just see it as not a big deal. And it wasn't just what she said. It was about what was missing: responsibility, clarity, empathy, and action, and a simple recognition that what happened was not okay. One more phenomenon I want to mention, which is quite usual in harassment cases, is the nice guy phenomenon. Reading her messages felt a little bit like arriving to a book club meeting where everybody are discussing a different book than the one I read. And the characters are same, it's just the plot is wildly different. Some parts left me genuinely confused. I wasn't sure what is she referencing. And that made me think, what did he tell her? And also how convincingly he did it. Because to me her response did not reflect concern. It reflected belief in a version that wasn't mine. And here we come to a thing I really wanted to mention. It's both frustrating and painfully familiar. Is that people who behave inappropriately often work overtime to come off as the nicest, the friendliest, the most charming people you have ever met. And no, this is not just my jaded heart talking, even though that too to some extent. But this is actually a very documented phenomenon in psychology and social behavior. According to one research, people with manipulative tendencies often present themselves as trustworthy and charming. And research on workplace harassment tells us that very often people who harass have a very good reputation, which works very well in silencing victims and complicating the accountability process. And here is the catch, not because they are actually good people, but because they are very invested into looking like good people. So for them, being well liked works as a shield, and charm is a tool. And it works surprisingly well. So when somebody says, but he was always so friendly, I believe them. I believe that was their experience, because sometimes friendly is just part of an act. So harassment happens when somebody crosses the boundaries and skips the whole consent thing, being around other humans. And no, it does not become excusable because somebody meant well or thought that they read the vibe. Because consent is not a guessing game. It is explicit, it is ongoing, and it is not negotiable. Just like GPS directions, if you do not hear continue, just don't take the wild turn. And this is not about pointing fingers. It's about getting honest, staying safe, and making real change. And if something similar happened to you, you are not alone. And your voice matters even when the whole world tries to push mute on you. I genuinely wish for a world where boundaries are respected first time, not after the PR crisis. And if this video resonates with you, please share it, because I would like to open up a conversation about how we can all do better as people, as establishments, as societies. Okay, darlings, thank you so much for listening. This was a bit of a personal video, but still I managed to make it part of my sexology studies and hear you somewhere else under some other topic. Also, if you have ideas on some topics, please let me know. Bye, darlings.